I'm Aaron Maté, sitting in for Jimmy Dore, here with Americans comedian Kurt Metzger and the miserable liberal Steph Zamorano. And there was a big rally in Washington, D.C. this weekend, rage against the war machine, voices from the left and the right calling out the proxy war in Ukraine. And among the speakers was our very own Jimmy Dore.
Do you know we could end this war today through diplomacy, but our politicians want to enrich weapons manufacturers so they keep donating to them to the tune of $100 billion. Chris Hedges has called America a mafia state. Systems of governance that are seized by a tiny cabal become mafia states. The military-industrial complex and the Ukraine war represent an orgy of looting and corruption.
And here's more from Jimmy.
America is so corrupt, even our Peace Prize winners are war criminals. Barack Obama won a Peace Prize and he immediately ramped up the war in Afghanistan, starting bombing Libya, put a hit on Osama bin Laden, dropped 26,000 bombs in Syria. And that's the thing about those Peace Prizes. Nobody ever tries to win a second one.
And here is another speaker, Max Blumenthal, editor of the Grayzone. Here he is.
Our corporate media, which is just a megaphone for our oligarchic elite, is constantly telling us who our enemies are. They said our enemy was in Serbia when I was a teenager. Then they said our enemy was in Afghanistan. Then they said our enemy was in Iraq, and maybe our enemy was down the street in the local mosque. And we are here today to say that we know who our real enemy is. Our enemy is not in Russia. Our enemy is you, the corporate media, and the oligarchy that you speak for. Our enemy is the empire that's robbed us of our rights, that's looted our treasury for its insane imperial regime change wars, and that has hounded and jailed real journalists like Julian Assange.
Dude, what? How much you want to bet somebody was paid money to go fly a Russian flag every time he says a sentence?
You are so right.
He's waiting for every time Max says something. Oh, like
you are so right about that.
Well, I mean, like, because the very next thing you're because it was Russian. I saw some Russian flags there.
Yeah.
I can't believe people literally false flag, like completely literally.
We need to fight them over there so we don't have to fight them here. We say that we will fight the neoconservatives over here before they kill millions more over there. Can you dig it?
Did you say, can you dig it?
Can you dig? I can dig it.
I can dig it.
That's not our war. Whether in Ukraine or the war they're planning over the Straits of Taiwan, their war is not our war. Our war is for the hundreds of thousands of homeless people sleeping in the cold. Our war is to clean up our rivers. Our war is to fix our crumbling schools and roads. Our war is to fight for the minds of our brothers and sisters subjected to a nonstop tidal wave of corporate media propaganda. Our war starts here. Our war starts today. Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
I can dig it.
I can dig it.
That's very dangerous, dude. You see the Warriors? That guy didn't do good after saying all that.
Thank you.
All right, that was Max Blumenthal.
Wow, that's annoying, dude. They're waving the flag every time he says they got to fix our roads and feet.
As if that's a Russian
Russia wants our roads fixed.
Yeah. Well, let's bring in the man himself, Max Blumenthal, editor of the Grayzone, very involved in this rally. Max, first of all, let's address those flags behind you. What did you think after watching the video back of seeing people waving the Russian flag as you were speaking?
Well, first of all, I don't know if anyone watching saw the Warriors.
Yeah.
Kurt, you saw that? So you know Cyrus from the Warriors. He's uniting all the gangs.
You get Cyrus talking like that.
All right on. I didn't hear you. So all right, somebody caught it. So I was just doing. That was my Cyrus thing. And another years ago, I did my Mel Gibson Freedom at the end of a speech. So
from Braveheart, nice.
And I was really hoping. I was hoping I could do that without a Russian flag behind me, but
well, that's why they would do it. Every time you said a point that would be a rallying point that no one would be able to disagree with, the guy, that's right, wave Russian flag.
So yeah, I investigated this, and to address this, I mean, it's sad that we even have to start out addressing it. I don't think it's the right way to go, but yeah, they ruined the visual of my speech for sure. And you know, if you looked out on the rally or in the rally, there were a lot of American flags, and there were a few scattered handful of freaks alongside the outskirts, the periphery of the rally, who were holding the kinds of flags that would be perfect for like corporate media or pro-war propagandists to photograph and use it to tarnish the entire rally. So this cat did everything he could to deliberately put that flag behind me, which is exactly the kind of look that like the neocons would want.
Yeah,
and I looked into it. I have some pretty good intelligence, and I will publicly retract this if I'm wrong, but I've been told pretty good authority that was a senior member of Caleb Maupin's Center for Political Innovation, which, you know, they didn't participate in the rally. Like Caleb didn't speak. And I don't know what that guy was thinking. I don't know if but they like to do like this LARPing cosplay stuff, and they do it at their conferences, and they, you know, discredit themselves as much as they can in the eyes of anyone who doesn't already agree with them. So if that's what they want to do, fine, but just don't do it on my time, in my space. And that's what they did. And I really,
so they're just like idiots. That's so much look like a log cat. What is it? The Lincoln Project kind of, you know, like a tiki torch.
It looks like some LARPing idiot, but it could be I honestly, I thought it was a Lincoln Project thing. Then my second guess would have been that this was some like Russian guy who is actually Russian, who was just trying to throw the gauntlet down before America and Washington, because, you know, the Russian symbols have been banned across the West. And it turned out it's just some white dude from America who's like maybe got a few screws loose. Yeah. I don't know what his problem is, but definitely played a destructive role. And, you know, in dissident movements, it's a magnet for people who are like a few cards short of a deck. And so that's what I think we got there. At the same time, and it sucks that I have to address this at the beginning of talk about what was really, I think, a very successful event. But there was this character, Matthew Heimbach, that all the haters of the rally are talking about. And he was a former neo-Nazi who was a very suspect character from a group called Atomwaffen, which actually had people fighting in Ukraine at certain points.
I remember hearing about them. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like a Nazi who would show up dressed in Nazi uniforms at rallies, you know, the perfect kind of person whose organization would be heavily infiltrated. And he suddenly switched and declared himself some kind of patriotic communist. And he brought like 5 of his, 5 members of his group to stand around on the periphery of the rally waving Soviet flags and Russian.
I was wondering what that was.
When Russian imperial flags and Soviet flags completely clash, if you know anything about Russia. Anyway, they attracted all the attention of people who wanted to discredit this rally, but they weren't even a part of the rally. They were scarcely ever in the rally, and they were doing everything they could to lap up media attention on the periphery. And they were doing recruiting. And my understanding of these organizations, the ones that these really fringe organizations that have very few members, and, you know, they show up while wearing Donda masks at rallies, is when they're doing the recruiting and they're so infiltrated, they're basically collecting data on people for the feds, whether they know it or not. So that was like the sad element. I told the organizers, like, the one way they're going to attack this is they're going to send in some like fake Nazis who have all have masks on, and then try to paint the rally as synonymous with them. And that's sort of what happened. But really, they mainly just ruined this one character just ruined the visual aspect of
I thought it was Ray Epps waving the flag in the back. That's who I thought.
I mean, if you're going to do that, don't you got to stick with one side? Because if you have a bunch of like Nazi and Soviet flags and imperial flag, now you're creating a peace. Like now you're having like them all getting along. I think that's like that Russia thing, to shake it every time you say a point is right where the camera is, dude.
Yeah.
Like that's somebody doing it on purpose.
Yes.
Well, look, I think we've given them enough attention. Let's talk about what this rally was about. It was about bringing together people with all sorts of differences on economic, social issues, but who are united to rage against the war machine. And that's what this was. And you had people from across the spectrum. You had Ron Paul. You had Dennis Kucinich, two former members of Congress on very opposite sides of the spectrum. So Max, talk to us about, what this rally was about and how it went.
Well, I went first. I was designated to go first, and the organizers asked me to set the tone for the rally. And I tried to do that. And I did that by invoking the bonus army, which encamped just a few blocks from where I live here in Southeast Washington, D.C. on the banks of the Anacostia River. In 1932, these were veterans who'd been betrayed and denied their benefits their bonuses from World War I at the dawn of the Great Depression. And they were massacred and brutalized. They were by General Douglas MacArthur, Dwight Eisenhower, and General George S. Patton, the future heroes of World War II. They sent the U.S. Army against these veterans of World War I, who they had fought alongside in the trenches of Europe. I think they killed hundreds of them. And what MacArthur said of them was that they pose a threat well beyond the demand for benefits when the government is basically out of money because of the Depression. They present the threat of pacifism, and behind it, communism. And they also, and some of them were influenced by communism, which was very popular at the time during the Great Depression, as well as a kind of America First isolationism, which was gaining popularity at that time. So they were coming from what we would consider the left and the right. They were also black and white men living together in these Hoovervilles. And they had fought in a segregated army, but they were integrated. So they were seen as a threat to the Jim Crow policies and policies of racial segregation. So the army killed veterans in the heart of Washington, D.C. And I invoke that in light of all the attacks on this rally, because it's bringing together people who identify with left and right. It's bringing together people who are defying these artificially imposed cultural barriers. And then the other point that I wanted to make in my speech was that the people I've met as a journalist on the other side of the U.S. guns, in the targets of empire, whether it's Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, in the Gaza Strip, where I've sat with people in the rubble of their homes where their families had been slaughtered by U.S. supplied bombs by the Israeli apartheid army, whether it was in Damascus, where they're suffering so harshly under U.S. sanctions right now during an earthquake, and they saw their city surrounded by U.S. and Gulf-backed jihadist death squads. Those people don't care what our political affiliation is here. They don't care if we're boosted and masked or unvaccinated, vaccinated, if we support Trump or if we support Bernie Sanders. They don't care about that. All they want us to do is what we were doing there, which is to rage against the war machine that's killing us, to stop the bombs, stop the sanctions. And so it should have been very simple for everyone to support that rally. And I think despite all the attacks and all the ridiculous sideshows, the rally was very successful at a time when it's really difficult to organize anti-war activity, specifically against the Ukraine proxy war. I saw estimates of the crowd between 1 and 5,000. I have no way of estimating, but I would definitely say there were more than 1,000 people. And that would make it one of the largest rallies since 2007, which was when Obama began to enter the fray and destroyed the anti-war movement along with, the Democratic Party. So I think it was a huge success there. And it was also the numbers would have been higher if other anti-war organizations or groups that fancy themselves as anti-war had actually participated instead of attacking and undermining this rally. 3 important former presidential candidates, Ron Paul, Tulsi Gabbard, and Dennis Kucinich, they were the last 3 presidential candidates who put opposition to U.S. imperial policy or interventionist policy at the front and center of their platforms. And Ron Paul's 87 years old, so this is really significant for him to actually come out to a public event when he rarely appears in public anymore. That's how important it was to him. Tulsi Gabbard gave a great speech about how Hawaiians were terrorized by a fake early warning of an incoming, I believe it was a Chinese missile strike or a North Korean missile strike. They were basically being prepared for a war psychologically, and what it's like to live there in the Pacific and to actually be on the front line of a response to a potential U.S. attack on China over the Taiwan Strait, which is what could be next. Dennis Kucinich talked about the Nord Stream pipeline terror attack carried out by the U.S. and the need to address Seymour Hersh's investigation and for congressional action and to consider impeaching Joe Biden for the worst act of industrial and environmental sabotage ever. And Ron Paul talked about means of defunding the war state. And then there were so many great speakers in between. So I thought it was a success given all the obstacles we face.
Well, among those obstacles, as you mentioned, is the fact that there were some leftist groups who were campaigning basically against this rally, didn't support it for many reasons, including they didn't like some of the speakers' views on economic and social issues because there were libertarians there and other voices on the right. And so there was an effort, I think, by some people, and you were very vocal about this, to undermine this rally. And it overall, I think it speaks to, on the left, there's been a inability to challenge this proxy war. Some leftists have even been enlisted in supporting it. So just as an illustration of this, I want to show you, Max, how Democracy Now!, which for a long time, I used to work there, it set the standard, I think, for being a progressive in the U.S. and what it's about. And when I was there, whenever there was an anti-war rally, we'd be sure to cover it and play clips from it. This is how Democracy Now! Covered Rage Against the War Machine.
Sunday in Washington, D.C., there was also a Rage Against the War Machine protest at the Lincoln Memorial, where former Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein and others spoke.
That's it. 10 seconds of coverage on Democracy Now! 10 seconds. That's it.
Did she used to be good at one point?
When I was there, yes, absolutely. There was a commitment to covering actions like this, and
what happened to that?
We'd be showing clips of people like Dennis Kucinich and Jill Stein all the time because that's what being a progressive once was about. But in this era, a lot of progressives have been enlisted to support things like the Ukraine proxy war. So, Max, I mean, talk to us a bit about you traditionally come from the left, you identify with the left. What this experience was like for you and the attacks, seeing the attacks that this rally faced from people who identify with the left.
Well, there's so much to say there. First of all, Amy Goodman's segment or news bit on the Ukrainian children's chorus singing for peace in a no-fly zone was a lot longer than and more passionately delivered than that one. So we can see where Amy Goodman is at. And her betrayal of the anti-war movement is consistent with what we're seeing across the traditional professional activist left, which presents a lot of radical rhetoric, recruits a lot of sort of alienated young people on college campuses with the promise of radical action and even revolution, and at best only superficially challenges the state. If anything, especially during the pandemic, they reinforced the state. They were the left wing of the World Economic Forum. So, I mean, let's get into some of the details here. I think I'm going to be providing as many details as I can about the campaign against this rally from within left-wing organizations and organizations that presented themselves as anti-war as I can going forward, because I think it's disgusting that they would get in the way. It's like Ronald Reagan would always talk about the 11th commandment is never attack a fellow Republican. And I would say that the 11th commandment should be never undermine an anti-war rally if you actually care about stopping nuclear war. And as Jimmy said, what they're saying is, I'm against nuclear. I don't want nuclear war, but not with them. It's like Jimmy conjured up this scenario in his speech about firemen arriving to his house and his house is on fire. And then he stands in the door and says, "Excuse me, are you all vaccinated? And what do you think about Social Security? I can't let you in my house to stop the fire unless you agree with me on Social Security." And that's what certain organizations and personnel in certain organizations within what I call the professional sectarian left did with this rally. Now, first, I got to talk to someone who actually was a participant on the phone call that Code Pink staffers had with Medea Benjamin, who basically is the face and spiritual leader of Code Pink, and I think one of the most heroic anti-war activists of our time. She was backstage with us at the rally. She was fully in support of it. And I can talk about this on background. I didn't get this from her, but one Code Pink staffer after another, these kind of millennial professional left types, NGO types, would say that they didn't feel safe at the rally as a Muslim or as a gay person. So so she couldn't participate. I asked Medea, why couldn't you actually just sack them all? And she doesn't actually have that power. I mean, what I would have done is I would have gone to have them all go to the HR director, have the HR director fire them all, and then fire the HR director.
But why do they? But if they don't feel safe, I mean, that's of course their prerogative. But they don't have to go. But they don't have to go to the rally. They can just not go.
Well, they kind of like held her hostage because she wanted to continue working with Code Pink, and she couldn't do what I would have done.
Right.
I would have had a mass purge. And but she couldn't do that. She's a board member. I think she's actually retired from her previous role, and she wants to continue working with them. So they held her hostage because of what we would call woke politics. And just being on stage, I watched every speaker. I was around everybody there. If anything, there were denunciations of Islamophobia, and you heard it from my speech. And there were no attacks on gay people from the stage. I mean, I don't know what they're talking about, but it shows that they actually prioritize boutique social issues to stopping war, and that they infest these anti-war organizations and basically infiltrated them and are neutralizing them from within. So that's what took place at Code Pink. That's really sad. The Green Party had a very contentious vote. We saw in past years the Green Party fell after Jill Stein under the leadership of Howie Hawkins, who is a huge supporter of the Ukraine proxy war, is a supporter, active supporter of regime change in Syria. I don't know how he got in control of that group. He's no longer the leader, but they basically have no leadership as far as I can tell. And Jill Stein was there at the rally, also another important former presidential candidate. And the Green Party sent some of its membership out, but other members opposed this. And then you have the Answer Coalition, which is like a front for the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And I think this group may have played one of the most important roles in attempting to undermine this rally from the left, because they have their people on the board of Veterans for Peace. They're a close coalition partner with Code Pink. I know they share funders with Code Pink. And Answer is a significant organization in the anti-war movement because they played a role in the major 2003-2004 Iraq war protests that got hundreds of thousands of people out. And, they didn't they don't have hundreds of thousands of people. They have maybe like hundreds and hundreds of people. They are a Marxist-Leninist organization. And they're really good at getting permits for protests. That's like their specialty. So they got the permits for the Iraq war protests. But it was really like a lot of democratic organizations that used their massive mailing lists, like MoveOn.org, that brought out tons of people because they were organizing against Bush's Republican war. And so there's this fantasy of this liberal, left socialist coalition that they still seem to entertain. But the Democrats, especially since the Obama era, have become the pro-war party. But Answer PSL still has this fantasy of coalitioning with them, and then having this endless left-right conflict. And so I don't know if they issued any official statement, but I saw their higher level members attacking the rally. Some of these people are like obsessed with hating Tulsi Gabbard. Like a very unhealthy obsession.
It sounds like the Russian obsession. I mean, it sounds exactly like culture war profiteering is every bit as good as regular war profiteering.
It sounds like they don't dig peace.
Well, no, I mean, you just look at what they've been doing I've been looking at what they've been doing. I mean, I worked with them on the Venezuelan Embassy Protection Collective. They did a good job out there, maybe because Venezuela is like a socialist oriented government. Their leadership was, denounced Russia's invasion, and the rallies that they had were pretty small and forgettable, honestly. Didn't seem like they put a lot of effort into it in the past year. They did put a lot of effort into opposing, reversing Roe. They were heavily involved in that nationally. This was during the Ukraine proxy war. Throughout the summer, I just saw very little activity from them on Ukraine. And they had some a much smaller rally in New York like a few weeks ago. And I think that was going to be the end of their organizing until this rally came around. And they were like, well, we're not going to be a part of it, and we're going to denounce it. And, this is fascism, or whatever they wanted to say. But now they're having an alternative rally exactly a month later. It's like, we can't be a part of that because those are the bad kids that we can't play with. So we're going to have a rally. And, what I heard from people who are going to be involved in that rally is this is a much more energetic effort by Answer PSL to actually bring in coalition partners because they want to show up this rally. They're actively competing with another anti-war rally after trying to depress turnout for it. So it shows me two things. First, that they are threatened by the coalition and the kind of political and cultural momentum that's forming around Rage Against the War Machine, because they want to dictate the anti-war movement and control it, and also exclude lots of people from it, just like they exclude unvaccinated people from their activist centers. But they also are being forced to step up their own game by Rage Against the War Machine. So it clearly shows how Rage Against the War Machine is actually reinvigorating anti-war activity and just forcing the issue with other groups. Yeah. So, I mean, go have your alternative rally, but let the record reflect that Answer PSL has actually, at least through many of its members, who I've seen on Twitter and elsewhere, and on their little radio programs or podcasts, have denounced an anti-war rally, attacked it, and attempted to undermine it. And that just really says everything about your priorities. And they did so because of social issues. The demands, by the way, on their rally are different from the demands that were on the Rage Against the War rally. And the contrast,
Rage Against the War was
interesting.
Rage Against the War was end the proxy war in Ukraine and NATO expansion, free Julian Assange. That was the basics, right?
Well, also end the CIA, abolish the CIA, which is a real concrete demand, and it's not something that hasn't been discussed even in Congress during the golden era of intelligence reform, the Church Commission. It was none other than Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan who proposed breaking up the CIA because of its excesses and extremist assassination policies, covert activity, drug dealing, etc. Moynihan was no leftist. But I'm just saying it's a concrete demand. And then you look at their demands. Some of them are pretty good. But one of them is end bigotry. And I'm like, I oppose bigotry. We all oppose bigotry.
Didn't they just not go with your rally out of bigotry, by the way?
Right.
Well, no, but I'll get into that in a second. But end bigotry, I mean, that's just an abstract concept. That's not a concrete demand. It's like end hate. Mm-hmm. It's such a liberal conception. And there's nothing about ending the CIA. So a lot of virtue signaling from them. And then, you had people like Jackie Lookman from the Black Alliance for Peace denounce this rally as so white and call everyone racist. And I saw her on my friend Jared Ball's radio program, and she was actually asked, who are you talking about? Who are you referring to when you call the speakers racist? And she called them latte leftists, like who've never done anything. And she spent 5 minutes refusing to name any names.
Of course.
And then, she was involved with the Answer PSL's, half-hearted tiny rallies, and said that those are the rallies that we should be having. So, I mean, it just really shows you why the anti-war movement has been in such a sad state, why it continues to have problems getting going. And it's just because of the narcissism of the people who have posed as its leadership and failed to deliver anything since the great anti-war protests against Bush's Republican war. And just being in this rally, being in the marching with people, going to there was a reception afterwards, so I got to meet a lot of the people and have extended conversations with them. I met someone from Kodiak, Alaska, who came from Alaska to the rally. I met a couple from rural Vermont who drove down to the rally. I met many people from Ohio, many people from California. So many people came from out of town because this meant so much to them. And these are people who are not only opposed to this war, but they are opposed to what I call the tidal wave of corporate media propaganda, the hybrid war being fought on the American people through the media. And they also saw through the COVIDian propaganda that the professional sectarian left opponents of this rally actually tried to reinforce. Party for Socialism and Liberation's DC chapter actively called for a China-style lockdown in Washington, DC for Omicron earlier during the Omicron variant, which would have prevented any protests from ever even taking place because people would have been welded into their homes. So there are so many cultural divides there, and it was so interesting. The people who cohered around this rally are united by something that I think is so much deeper than a political ideology, or a political party, or a school of thought. It was actually kind of a cultural happening. And I think in that respect, there's a new force emerging in American politics that's being born out of the post-pandemic era, or what was born out of the pandemic and how people responded to it. And these are the people that really responded when Jimmy Dore started challenging all the lies around the mandates and the lockdowns. And these are people who are hardcore Grayzone readers, and these are people who are actually turning out, going offline. They're not slacktivists, but they haven't been fully organized. And they were able to come out possibly in the thousands for something that was under attack from all sides, from within and without. I mean, I didn't even talk about the haters from the, neoconservative side who've been attacking this rally, or the corporate media.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that later, but trying to end this on a positive note, it sounds like this was a very challenging thing to put together, and attacks coming from all different sides, but I think you've given us a lot to think about here, and overall, I think we can think about trying to overcome all the sectarian stuff, which accomplishes nothing. And
it accomplishes weakening the anti-war movement.
Yeah, that's what it's there for.
Yeah,
these people, that thing that weakens organizations, that tore through comedy, that tore through all the entertainment. Remember stupid Gamergate that I ain't paid? That was a part on the wall no one was watching, and everybody got implanted in everybody's thing. That's amazing to me. That SJWs could ruin leftists, radical leftists. Like, that's wild, dude.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening before our eyes, but props to Nick Brana from the People's Party, Angela McArdle from the Libertarian Party for putting this together. There's no debate on the fact that it has breathed new life into the anti-war movement and forced its internal critics to step up their game. And I would also note that over 100 local mainstream media affiliates, TV affiliates, have covered this rally. And some of the coverage I saw was kind of fair.
Wow.
Or straightforward. So I think the rally actually broke through.
It's hard enough to organize just in and of itself, but then when you have people who are ostensibly on your own side trying to undermine it, it makes it even more difficult. So the organizers pulled off something important here.
You could have got Fred Hampton. I'm amazed how well it went.
Yeah. Well, let's not talk about Fred Hampton and what he did to cross cultural lines and transcend cultural wedge issues and boutique social issues to actually fight for a serious common cause, challenging the empire from inside the belly of the beast. Let's not talk about that Fred Hampton. I mean, in closing, I mean, there just is a rich tradition of people overlooking serious differences, and I have serious differences with many of the speakers, especially on a lot of domestic issues. I mean, I probably line up more with the Answer PSL rally on a lot of domestic issues. But the point was to transcend that and maximize our numbers to send a message to the war state. And there's a rich tradition of this. I mean, we had, even after the Patriot Act, Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum joined together with the NAACP against the Patriot Act. I was talking to Medea Benjamin. I think that Code Pink has partnered with the Heritage Foundation to oppose the bombing of Syria back in 2013. I might be getting the chronology wrong, but they've had lots of left-right partnerships at Code Pink. And Code Pink, actually, this is crazy. Code Pink did a sister rally in San Francisco with Rage Against the War Machine, their local chapter, but their national chapter, because it's infested with professional sectarian leftist NGO types, they refuse to support Code Pink's local chapter's rally. So let them be divided and fight among themselves. We're going to keep the momentum going forward. I really feel like this is going to snowball into something much bigger this summer because the war is still going to be going on.
Doing live stand-up comedy in Tempe, Palm Springs, Milwaukee, Nashville, Northampton, Massachusetts, Syracuse, Cohoes, New York, and Hartford, Connecticut. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets and become a premium member. Get access to all our content.